Hi, Dr. Snug. I'm going to be talking to you today about speciesism in the Anthropocene. So for the sake of my presentation, I do want to really quickly define speciesism as the tendency to favor one's own species above another, particularly the human tendency to favor human rights interests above those of other non-human animals. Proponents, or people who agree with speciesism, claim that species membership is somehow a morally relevant characteristic when considering the rights and interests of animals because species membership is linked to particular capacities or capabilities that are themselves morally relevant. So these capabilities or capacities that, for whatever reason, limit the consideration of rights and interests for animals, according to Britannica, include autonomy, rationality, intelligence, and language use. And I disagree with this. I disagree with the notion that these things limit consideration of animals' needs and wants, because aside from the fact that there are certain humans that have such limited capacities and capabilities, there are numerous scientific studies and advancements, many of which have bubbled into pop culture, that explain how animals do have these capacities or capabilities. They're just different than humans. And in my opinion, to say these capacities or capabilities are superior in human form is to make a completely improvable, 100% morally qualified assessment that is ironically in itself speciesist. I take particular umbrage with the notion that autonomy and limited autonomy of animals somehow restricts the rights or considerations we should give them, specifically because animals have no autonomy, often due to the result of human intervention. So on one hand, we have animals such as pets, farm animals, lab animals, and zoo animals that have limited autonomy because their environment is completely fabricated and controlled by humans, and they're thus alienated from their species being. On the other hand, we have wild or feral animals that have limited autonomy because their environments are similarly tainted by human intervention, often through habitat destruction, in such a way that reduces the number of breeding opportunities they have by reducing the number of breeding mates that are available to them, by reducing other populations' competition, and by reducing maybe even other populations as a source of prey for animals like predators. And sometimes, in really extreme cases, human intervention can even take the form of transplantation of a new species into a completely new environment, as is the case of the North salmon being moved from a lake in Northern California to a stream in New Zealand. Despite all this, I have an issue with this core notion of opponents of speciesism, the notion that speciesism is somehow the same as other forms of irrational discrimination and prejudice. So I pose the question to myself, is speciesism the same as things like racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on? All of the text that we have read in class makes it very difficult for me to answer this question with anything other than a resounding yes. They're oftentimes the same because they require because they are human-made problems that require human-made interventions. They often these social injustices wind up addressing similar structures of power that perpetuate similar forms of injustice and oppression. But they are different, and I argue here that they're different because animals arguably suffer worse injustices than humans do in the form of slaughter, domestication, selective breeding, extinction, use for entertainment, and the list could go on and on and on. And yet, I have trouble with this notion because I do see similarities in the way that humans have been treated, even if the examples are less extreme and not contemporary, and these more extreme forms of injustices that animals suffer. A quote from my notes really sums up my thinking on the matter. I don't think that there are intrinsic differences between humans and non-human animals that merit differential moral treatment, but I cannot put speciesism on par with other social issues like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. A quote that I stumbled across in the readings that also kind of really puts a signpost next to this notion that I disagree with is the quote that just as sociology has been willing to consider a widening array of forms of social exclusion and oppression and the links between them, it must now consider non-human animals. I don't disagree with this statement, but I find it difficult to endorse it as I fear it would complicate social issues at hand. Maybe this complication is even good or important, but I just cannot shake the feeling that complications come at the sacrifice of other, more important, human-made social issues. So I prompt myself the following question. Why can't I get over some speciesist statements? And in my opinion, it all comes down to being socialized in an anthropocentric society. First, I can explain this using the sociozoologic scale. And I identify with the desire that Arluke and Sanders claim humans have to create such a scale by ranking animals on some sort of ladder. I think it's nice to fit things into boxes, and I think it would be cool to be able to explain things in such simple terms, but this is just not the reality of the world that we live in. Similarly, I also catch myself incorrectly thinking of evolution in such a way that humans have emerged as the pinnacle, ideal, or final form of evolution. While this is an incorrect thought, I find myself thinking as much because humans have so many advancements that, as far as we can tell, other animals have not made. But this doesn't necessarily mean that humans are the quote-unquote final form of evolution. Something that also gets to me is the reality that we are living in the Anthropocene, which has yet to actually be proven according to the International Union of Geological Sciences. The imperative is on them to determine if humans have changed the Earth system to the point that is reflected in the rock strata. But I think that humans have done this. Just, I don't really have any reasons to back this up other than the fact that humans have destroyed so much land for their own use that we have literally defined an entire geological epoch due to our activity. And this has defined the way that I've grown up. I've grown up in the Anthropocene, literally a time defined by human activity. I heard about the Anthropocene through my environmental justice research from the Sustainable Development Goals Academy from a WebEx course I took in 2019 on planetary boundaries. And so this links to my next notion of environmentalism. So even nestled in the scope of environmentalism, I find myself coming up against anthropocentric ideals. I have read more articles like the Grossi et al. Articles that address CAFOs and other industrialized forms of meat production as a contributor to climate change, but address them in such a way that assimilates or obfuscates meat eating rather than actually challenged it. I have not really read articles like Arikari's 2016 article that considered even simple things like how the language of previous articles convey an acceptance of animal oppression, essentially normalizing the use of animals for research, entertainment, sport, labor, fashion, and food, and how the normalization of these practices reinforces the normalization of using animals in these ways. I consider it essential to human activity, and because I have such an anthropocentric way of thinking, I have never thought of abolition of institutions like meat eating as a feasible option for environmental justice, nor is it something, if I'm being honest with myself, that I would really want. So, to kind of reframe my question, can I get over these speciesist sentiments I have? I hope the answer is yes, and that my continued education with this class will help me come to grips with the anthropocentric thinking and tendencies I have. But for right now, I can't get over this itching feeling that there is something that sets humans apart from animals and necessarily prioritizes the resolution of human oppression before animal oppression. What this thing is really eludes me at the time because, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, I really, on basically all fronts, disagree with people who support speciesism. But what I can explain is that this feeling that I can't seem to explain, I'm not alone in having this feeling. In fact, our society seems to be structured on the active oppression of animals. Anthropocentrism is all around us. No wonder I can't really fully release the notion of anthropocentrism in a matter of a month and a half. And here are my references. Thank you so much.